The federal government has finally responded to the 14% tariffs levied on Nigerian goods entering the U.S. market by President Donald Trump. The government acknowledged that the taxes could have adverse impact on the country's oil and non-oil exports, potentially disrupting trade relations between both countries. In a statement issued on Sunday, Nigeria's Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, said the policy would undermine the competitiveness of Nigerian goods, especially in sectors reliant on market access and price competitiveness. According to the minister, Nigeria's exports to the United States have averaged $5 to $6 billion annually in the last 2 years. However, she was upbeat that the development offers Nigeria the opportunity to look towards other economies across the globe while boosting its non-oil exports by strengthening quality assurance, control, and traceability. Well, joining us to discuss Trump's newly imposed tariffs and its impact on Nigeria's trade relations with the U.S. is Dr. Sam Amadi, the director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. Dr. Sam, glad to have you join me on Arise News Night. What's your thinking, your sense on Trump? I mean, he's doing it across the globe, but on Nigeria, 14% on tariffs on Nigerian goods exported to the U.S.
I think the key point here is there's a new, Trump is probably disrupting the
world order.
World trade order. And essentially, it has to do with a sense of what can you do in response? We've seen these generalized tariffs, and we've seen countries, we've seen Taiwan make a call, we've seen China, retaliate. We've seen Canada perhaps, and the UK trying to bend. But again, the concept, the perspective is here very clear. The US, as of 2023, US exported about $6 billion worth of exports. Nigeria to US is about $3 billion. And again, the things that US to Nigeria, car, top of the bill. Nigeria is oil, petroleum products, and then fertilizer. And so things can happen. Nigeria can soak it in. That means Nigeria, like the minister says, we will send less because if it's a tariff, depending on what we're sending, petroleum. So they put a tariff on us, and the US is willing to perhaps do more self-provisioning, as Trump is saying. It's a drill, okay? Maybe they will generally reduce their consumption of imported petrol. Nigeria will be affected somewhat. Again, if there are countries where they are not putting a tariff on because of negotiated deals, then that means Nigeria fuel products will be more expensive, and that will mean we need to reallocate to other markets, perhaps. So we may have room for rebalancing. It's okay if we export less to the US because our products is going to be more expensive, and then of course they demand less from us, we can go elsewhere. That's one. The other issue is, if we want to retaliate, what are we retaliating? So are we going to, if we put extra tariff, let's say 15% or 20% on US cars, there are not too many here, the price goes up, we will not buy. It further will damage, except we have alternatives. We move to innocent, move to local producers. And this is what the productive capacity matters here. If we look at countries like China, for example, maybe they will ride this storm. They have local alternatives, perhaps. They also have products that America toys, okay? That's about 70% of... And
most of America's, quite some of America's are produced.
So they have a right, they can hit America. And of course, because America fancies itself as a large market, this is the key thing here. So they can absorb, they can say, you know what, you prefer our market because this is where the purchasing power is. And therefore, it's in their own interest to take in these losses or migrate to US to produce those products, which is the medium to long-term response if these tariffs stay. But again, this is part of, we're back to 18-something, where Hamilton and Jefferson had a big debate as to how America should grow. The Hamiltonian approach was infant industry protection, which later built into Federalist argument with Germans under Bismarck, that the only way to compete against the more advanced and privileged British market products was to build a wall, kind of tariffing. At the point, it was about 50% of this was tariff. So this is not unusual, but then the economy has shifted. the economists argue that when tariff helped build America in that wave of American industrial revolution and American economic growth, we didn't have the kind of globalization we have today.
The cross-border trade.
We didn't see the kind of trade in services. And we didn't see a globalization where components are now manufactured. Take, for example, a typical car, less American car, or Tesla, even Elon Musk. Some of the products are outsourced and manufactured outside. So this is a new economic production system. And so whether this will bankrupt America, lead to, the first time we had this big tariff led to depression and led, some argue, to the 1930 economic crisis. But there's some wisdom in tariffing, not just for infant protection, not for a strategic game to also help some industries. For example, the American companies are leading companies in the world, but the American inner cities, the American job market, the American employment market, the American inequality, the income, the wages are not the best. So the argument is that...
I wish I were interested in America now, because, I mean, the talk is that there's already... I mean, it's causing crisis in America.
But for us,
so I'm not interested.
What it means for us is that we need to not think about a changed world.
Oduwole said something very poignant here. She said, it will now create, someone says in every problem there's an opportunity.
Absolutely.
So this is now create an opportunity for us to
diversify.
Diversify, change our view. But first, we'll be able to take it.
First is that we need to improve intra-African trade. Now, the things we are sending, maybe unfortunately primary products, and West Africa has no industrial capacity for fuel, oil, the way we. So we are primary products largely, fertilizer, urea, just to help also. But if we are going to be entering into maybe rare minerals, for example, as we have, we can now ride on this new economic order to ask for fabrication in Nigeria. So, for example, if people say, oh, lithium, you can use it for iPhones and all that, and so we export. So we can also say, okay, you have to come to Nigeria. That's number two. You have to, again, every country has to look at economic growth and expansion of capacity. Free trade, by the way, if you look at WTO, there's also preferential options for poor countries to use high tariff. The truth about the matter is that countries impose tariff. In fact, some of the poorest countries have very high tariffs. But under the new order, people overlook it because it's part of the idea of global international fair trading, that, okay, you allow them, they're just poor countries. Look at what happens to this impact. Some of the smallest countries are suffering. But what it tells us here is Nigeria and West Africa is that we need to think about the global economy first in the form of national economies in competitive mode. So not just global economy, okay, Okonjo-Iweala talks about WTO, talk about global economy. If there is a crisis, can your economy absorb it? Do you have absorptive capacity? Do you have the production? Can you expand their production? So if, for example, the U.S. cars are now, U.S. is going to sustain those cars, okay? But if we're going to export cars, we have a problem. We export petroleum. We won't be hit by too much, but this is revenue. We're going to lose revenue.
Someone also talked about another kind of opportunity for Africa.
Intra-African trade.
Yeah, to begin to really trade among themselves.
The problem with
particularly when you think about BRICS and they're wanting to less dependence on the dollar.
The problem with African trade is that we have infrastructural crisis, okay? Look at movement from here to Ghana. I want to go to Senegal, Sierra Leone. You might move all around the world before you get to a particular Dahomey or maybe Congo, for example. That's one infrastructure. Two is regulatory in terms of creating a convergence of national laws, which is what AGFA and AFTA and the framework, even from the PAD, the idea was some kind of convergence. We have been struggling with that because for two reasons. The parliaments, the executive governments in Africa are not development ambitious, they're not developmental states. So some of them are looking at natural resources. Okay, so you have a budget, oil windfall, you spend it. Angola is doing well with oil windfall. You can see what's moving on Ghana, perhaps will enter. The idea of a developmental state, working development strategy, if they have a developmental agenda across West Africa, then that will ignite a passion to unify commercial regulatory standards, and that helps you. So if you deal with infrastructure constraints and deal with regulatory convergence, then you create incentive for businesses to co-locate. And then you see more greater trade. Because if you look at less than 26%, okay, look at Europe, it is about 65% inter-European trade. So even if this trade tariffing war they will be able to absorb it. The
Yeah.
UK is saying they're going to look more to the EU and less to the US. But so Africa is vulnerable. We're exposed because, well, fortunately for us, maybe, we don't export much to US, so there'll be very few products that, especially the ones that give us revenue. But the things that we rather import more, you know, than we export. Now, it also affects the AGOA framework,
Yeah.
which was some kind of preferential option.
But maybe again, this will now begin to kill our pressure for importation and begin to boost our yearning or so
for local
to export.
You need to have a local development strategy.
Then we'll begin to have it.
Create those products, even if they're not very quality as
marketable as it
was.
I was discussing.
Then you start
creating value
over time. Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Amadi, Director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, for allowing me to pick your brain.